Here's a strange question. Why do people resist better ideas? History shows they often do, not because the ideas don't work, but because changing familiar habits can be surprisingly difficult. Few inventions prove that better than the zipper. Today, it's everywhere. In our backpacks, our suitcases, our jeans, our tents, and countless other things we rarely stop to think about. It has become so ordinary and so reliable that most of us barely notice it's there. But when it first appeared, people looked at it and decided they'd rather keep using buttons. That decision shaped the next 50 years of its history, and the reasons are far more surprising than you might expect. But that's exactly what makes its story so strange, because this invention almost never became part of our lives. For years, people ignored it. Manufacturers didn't trust it, customers didn't want it, and many believed it would never replace something as simple as a button. If history had unfolded just a little differently, the zipper might have disappeared completely. Instead, it quietly became one of the most successful inventions the modern world has ever known. Not through a single moment of genius or overnight success, but through decades of failure, relentless redesign, and an unexpected series of events that no inventor could have predicted. Its journey would pass through world fairs, industrial workshops, battlefields, factories, and eventually into almost every home on Earth, all because one everyday problem had gone unquestioned for centuries, and solving it turned out to be far more difficult than anyone imagined. Because long before the zipper existed, people had simply learned to live without it. For thousands of years, getting dressed wasn't something people thought much about, because there was only one way to fasten clothing. You buttoned it, or tied it, or laced it together. Whether you lived in ancient Rome, medieval Europe, or the rapidly growing cities of the 19th century, the process was remarkably familiar. Rows of buttons, leather laces, metal hooks, tiny eyelets. Strings pulled tight by hand. People accepted them not because they were perfect, but because they had never known anything else. And for everyday clothing, they usually worked well enough. But not everything was so simple. Imagine putting on a pair of tall leather boots. Each morning, you'd spend several minutes fastening dozens of tiny hooks, or threading long laces through narrow eyelets. Now imagine repeating that, day after day, year after year. Children struggled to dress themselves. Workers lost valuable time. Travelers wrestled with bulky luggage. Even closing simple garments could become surprisingly tedious. Yet almost no one questioned it. Not because people enjoyed the inconvenience, but because inconvenience has a strange habit of becoming invisible. The longer we live with something, the more normal it begins to feel. History is full of everyday problems that people simply stop noticing, until someone looked at the ordinary and asked a very different question. What if clothing could close in one smooth motion? It sounds obvious today, but at the time, it was a radical idea, because replacing the button was never going to be easy. And the first person who tried would discover exactly why. It was a bold idea. The first serious attempt came in 1851, not from a clothing designer, but from an inventor named Elias Howe. Today, Howe is remembered for helping revolutionize the sewing machine. But hidden among his many inventions was something few people remember: a patent for an automatic clothing fastener. On paper, it was a clever idea, a device designed to close fabric more quickly than traditional fastenings. For a brief moment, it looked as though the future had arrived. But then, nothing happened. Howe never developed the invention further. His attention remained fixed on the sewing machine, and the fastener quietly slipped into obscurity. For decades, the problem remained unsolved. Then, nearly 40 years later, another inventor decided to try again. His name was Whitcomb Judson. Unlike Howe, Judson wasn't trying to change fashion. He believed everyday life could simply be made a little easier. His invention was called the Clasp Locker, a mechanical fastening device made up of tiny hooks and eyes that could be joined together with a sliding mechanism. It was unlike anything people had seen before. Judson believed it could replace the slow process of fastening boots and clothing by hand. Confident in his invention, he unveiled it at one of the biggest events of the 19th century, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Thousands of visitors passed through the exhibition halls. Inventors unveiled machines that promised to shape the future. Electricity dazzled the crowds. Engineering marvels captured the world's imagination. Judson hoped his invention would be one of them. It wasn't. The Clasp Locker had a problem. It was complicated. It could catch. It could come apart unexpectedly. And it wasn't reliable enough for everyday use. People admired the idea, but they didn't trust the invention. Once again, the button survived. And once again, the zipper's story seemed destined to end before it had truly begun. But sometimes, an invention doesn't need a completely new idea. Sometimes, it simply needs someone willing to fix what everyone else had given up on. By the early 20th century, the idea should have been finished. 2 inventors had tried. 2 inventors had failed. Most people had stopped believing the problem was worth solving. But good ideas have a habit of refusing to disappear. Around that time, the fastener found its way into the hands of a quiet Swedish-born engineer named Gideon Sundback. Unlike the inventors before him, Sundback wasn't trying to come up with a completely new idea. He looked at what already existed and asked a different question. What if the idea wasn't wrong, only the design? The earlier fasteners had promised simplicity, but in practice, they were frustrating. The hooks could slip apart. The mechanism wasn't reliable enough for everyday use, and manufacturing thousands of identical fasteners was incredibly difficult. Sundback believed those weren't reasons to abandon the invention. They were engineering problems. So he went back to the drawing board. Piece by piece, he redesigned the mechanism. The hooks gave way to small, interlocking metal teeth. The sliding mechanism became stronger, smoother, and far more dependable. Just as importantly, he developed new machinery capable of producing the fasteners consistently on a much larger scale. For the first time, the invention worked the way people had imagined it could. The fastener was quicker, stronger, more reliable. It finally solved the problem that inventors had been chasing for decades. After nearly 60 years, the zipper had become practical. At least, that's what history would have you believe. Because even after all those improvements, people still didn't rush to use it. Clothing manufacturers remained cautious. Customers trusted what they already knew. Buttons were familiar. Buttons were reliable. And changing centuries of habit turned out to be far more difficult than redesigning a machine. The zipper had finally won the engineering battle, but it was still losing. The battle for acceptance. It would take something much bigger than a brilliant design to change people's minds. And that something was already beginning to reshape the world. The zipper had finally become practical. But practicality alone wasn't enough. An invention can solve a problem perfectly and still fail if the world isn't ready for it. For years, buttons continued to dominate everyday clothing. Not because they were better, but because they were familiar. Factories already knew how to make them. Tailors already knew how to sew them. Customers already trusted them. Changing all of that would take more than a clever invention. It would take a changing world. As the 20th century unfolded, industry began moving faster than ever before. Factories produced clothing on an unprecedented scale. Travel became more common. New kinds of work demanded clothing that was practical, durable, and quick to use. The zipper suddenly offered something buttons couldn't: speed. Then came war. During the First World War, and in the years that followed, manufacturers began using improved fasteners on military equipment and specialized clothing where speed and reliability mattered. They appeared on pouches, protective gear, flight clothing, and other equipment designed for demanding conditions. The zipper wasn't replacing every button, but it was proving, again and again, that it could perform where traditional fastening struggled. Something important had changed. For the first time, people weren't looking at the zipper as an unusual invention. They were looking at it as a useful tool. That shift from curiosity to usefulness changed everything. As industries expanded, more manufacturers began experimenting with the fastener, not because it was fashionable, but because it had earned something far more valuable: confidence. The zipper had spent decades trying to prove it belonged. Now, for the first time, the world was beginning to believe it, and once people accepted the invention, something unexpected happened. They stopped seeing it as a machine and started seeing it as part of everyday clothing. Once people trusted the zipper, its journey became surprisingly quiet. There was no single moment when the world suddenly abandoned buttons. No headline announcing, "The age of the button is over." Instead, the zipper spread the way many great inventions do, slowly, almost unnoticed. Manufacturers began introducing it where it made everyday life just a little easier. The zipper found its place. Then, in 1923, something unexpected happened. The B.F. Goodrich Company introduced a new line of rubber boots fitted with the improved fastener. When the boots were open and closed, they made a sharp zipping sound. The company called them zipper boots. The name was simple, easy to remember. And before long, people stopped using it just for the boots. The fastener itself became known as the zipper. Ironically, one of the world's most recognizable names didn't come from its inventor. It came from a product. As the decades passed, the zipper continued appearing in more places. Little by little, the zipper stopped feeling new. It simply became normal. Today, the zipper is everywhere, on jackets, backpacks, and countless other things we use every single day. Most of us open and close one without giving it a second thought, and perhaps that's the greatest compliment an invention can receive. Because the inventions that truly change the world don't always become the most celebrated. Sometimes they become the least noticed. Think about it. Nobody pauses to admire a zipper before leaving the house. We simply expect it to work every time. And that's easy to take for granted, especially when you know how close it came to being forgotten. It spent decades as an idea that struggled to convince the world. It survived failed designs, years of indifference, and countless moments when it could have quietly disappeared into history. Yet today, billions of people rely on it without ever knowing its story. That transformation didn't happen because the zipper was revolutionary from the beginning. It happened because people refused to give up on improving an idea they believed could be better. History often celebrates the moment an invention is created, but just as important is the long journey that follows. The years of failure, the quiet improvements, the patience to keep solving problems, even when no one is paying attention. The greatest sign of its success is that we hardly notice it at all.